So welcome back to this SUPboarder video where we're going to be looking at two very normal all-round paddleboards to get you on the water for the first time. We've got an inflatable Fanatic Fly Air and we've got the composite Fanatic Fly, both pretty much at the same sort of size. But really, what is the difference between the inflatable Fly Air and the Fly Composite? And really driving into why the board's designs do make the boards feel very different on the water. Talking about the pros and cons, obviously, of the hardboard and the inflatable. And at the end of the video, hopefully make you understand which board will be best for you. Now, a bit of background about the brand Fanatic, who makes both these boards. They've been making paddle boards and windsurf boards for a long time, established back in 1981 when they first started the board riding company. And they do have a very strong and well-made presence of boards in the windsurf market and in the SUP market. So the two boards we're going to be looking at today are from the Fanatic Fly range. The Fly range of boards is your all-round range of boards from Fanatic. Happy in the surf, happy flat water, doing a bit of cruising, and really getting you into paddleboarding, maybe as your first time paddleboard or as an experienced paddler that just wants a board that can do it all. Flies obviously come in inflatable and a hard composite version, and they also come in different constructions in those inflatable and the composite versions as well. The ones we've got here, the Fly Premium, which is the more top end, nicer, better finished off board, nicer package from the inflatable, and we've got the Fly Bamboo Edition, which is a really good looking board, but they also do other composite constructions as well. So let's go over the specifications of these two boards that we've been using. The Fly Bamboo version, this board here, the composite board, this is the 10'6" long board. It's 31 inches wide. It's just under 4.5 inches thick when we measured it, and the literage is 177 litres, 10.2 kilograms in weight, and it comes as standard as a 2+1 fin box with multi-side fins and a US center fin box. And it retails at £1,149. And this board in the bamboo construction is also available as a 9'6" and an 11'2". The Fly Air in the premium construction, we try to match the boards up as close as possible in size wise. This is the 10'4" version, but it is 33 wide, so it's a little bit wider than the composite board. It's 5.5 inches thick. It brings a volume at 284 litres. And that weighs 10.3 kilograms, so it's only a 0.1 kilogram heavier than the composite board. And the Fly Air also is a 2+1 fin box, but it comes with fixed side fins and a US center box. And it retails at £839. There are a few more boards available in the Fly Air range. You can get a 9', a 9'8", and a 10'8" as well. So in this video, we're first off going to talk about the features and fittings you get with the boards, and also having a quick overview looking at the inflatable pump and the backpack. Then we're going to look at the deflection test, and then we're really going to move on to the outline shape, the rail profile, the rocker profile, the bottom shape, the fin setup, and we're going to talk about exactly why the difference of the shapes has a different feel to the boards on the water, and giving you the pros and cons to the inflatable versus the composite board. And then we'll finish off with who we think they're best suited for. So talking about the features you get on these boards and also the look of the Fanatic boards. Now, there's no doubt that Fanatic, they do stand out for us as a brand when it comes to look and styling compared to other boards in the market. Both these boards, they're completely different in style, but they really look classy and very stylish. The bamboo veneer that comes through this blue tint on the top of the Fly board is a really nice piece of artwork that actually adds a lot to the construction of the board. Up at the front on the Fly Bamboo, you've still got your potential of putting your bungees up at the front, so you could put a light cargo dry bag under the front, but it doesn't come as standard with the bungees. You have to put those on yourself. Moving back to the standing area, a big thing on all of the all-round Fanatic boards is all of the decks are really flat. They offer you a very good, wide, easy platform to stand on. The EVA deck pad is the super grippy one with the sort of diamond cuts inside the diamond cups. It's not the softest of deck pads, but it's extremely grippy when you're using it. Similar carry handle that are from other top brands, very comfy and very easy to use. In the front of that, you've got the pressure valve. Maybe sometimes if the board gets really hot or really cold, you might have to equalize the pressure from inside of the board to the outside air temperature. And in front of that, you've got a windsurf attachment, so you can take this board windsurfing as well. Moving back to the tail, big deck pad right the way to the edge, and it's finished off with a nice tail kicker, which is great in the surf, getting your foot against, and you know exactly where your back foot is when you're surfing and even doing step back turns on this board. The Fly Air in the premium construction is a really nicely finished board. I think personally it's one of the classiest inflatable paddleboards on the market. It's not super in your face, but it's really well finished off, and they've done a really good job on the graphics of that board. You've got bungees up at the front, but they're built in and they come as standard. Large deck pad again, very similar to the composite board, big, very flat, very stable. The deck grip on that is a little bit more comfy and a little bit softer, and it's even got little embossed Fanatic logos in that deck pad. So it's a very interesting little feature that they've incorporated. Just like the composite board, deck pad goes right to the back, nice and big, but there isn't a tail kicker on this board. There's only a tail kicker on the composite board. And then at the back of the board, you've got your inflation valve and then your leashing point. There's also a leashing point built into the composite Fanatic, but obviously it's not a D-ring that sticks out from the board. It's a slimline leashing point that you tuck your rope inside the board. Very traditional with all composite boards. And the only other fixing point of the Fanatic Air is also this D-ring under the nose up at the front. There's no fixing points on the Fly composite board. So obviously with the inflatable you do get a bag and a pump. The pump it comes with is a two-way pump, nicely branded up with Fanatic logos, easily gets the PSI pressure into the board. When the pumping starts to get hard, you can then turn the black nozzle around at the back of the pump and it will just pump on the downstroke, making it very easy to get a large amount of air in the board without having to put you under too much fatigue. The PSI pressure that needs to be put into the inflatable board, they have a recommended PSI of 15 PSI to a maximum PSI of 20 PSI. The bag that comes with the Fly Air Premium Edition is a really nice bag, really well padded around the shoulder area, well padded down the back. The finish of the bag is very nice. It's got wheels, it's got compartments to put your pump in and paddles down the side. It's a very nicely finished off bag, really easy to get the board in, and it definitely does look a lot more classy than a lot of the cheaper price point boards on the market. Now let's move on to our deflection test. Now a deflection test is where we measure how much the board bends under your feet when you're paddling it. Now we actually did the deflection test with the inflatable and actually the composite board, because a composite board will bend as well. Remember, the way we do our deflection test is we put it on a gap of 1.5 meters apart and we put a weight of 75 kilograms in the center of the board, and then we measure how much the board deflects from that point. When the Fly Air was pumped up to the recommended pressure of 15 psi, it dropped 17 millimeters. Now some of the stiffest boards in the market are coming around the 8, and the most flexible boards on the market are coming around the mid 25s, maybe 26s. And it definitely fits that sort of average all-round paddleboard. A lot of the all-round paddleboards are bending between the sort of 14 to 19 millimeters, so it's completely fine inside that sort of drop range. When we actually did the deflection test on the composite board, it only dropped 2 millimeters, but it shows you how even a composite board does actually bend, does actually have a deflection. So just for your interest, 2 millimeters is what the composite Bamboo Edition dropped. So now let's move on to the interesting stuff. Let's talk about the different shapes that are on these boards, the different designs that have been put onto the inflatable, and definitely the hardboard, and really why they feel like they do on the water, and ending up with who do we think the boards would best suit. So looking at overall outline shape first, you can see these boards are very similar in their outline shape. Nice and round and wide up at the nose, fairly wide throughout the width, and then a little bit of width being pulled in slightly towards the tail, giving you a round tail. Having a wider nose, a nice rounded nose, makes the board nice and stable. When you rock from side to side, it's going to give you a lot of stability, and the same is also with the tail. The wider the tail is, the more stable it is. Just so you know, the thinner the tail is, the more pulled in the tail is, generally the faster the board will paddle. And actually the overall width of the board, the thinner you go, the faster the board will paddle, which is why race boards are really thin, and all-round paddle boards like this, do surfing and general cruising, are definitely a lot wider. So they may be very similar in the outline shape, but when it comes to rail shapes, this is where there's a big difference between an inflatable paddleboard and a composite paddleboard, because you cannot get that shape in a inflatable rail yet. I know that companies are working towards changing that rail shape, but at the moment all paddleboards out of most of the rail shape around their board are just a round rail, unless they maybe have a tail release runner or an edge runner or some sort of plastic strip stuck at the back of the board. But All of the rest of the board is still a round shape. So basically the top of the rail is the same shape as the bottom of the rail. With a composite board, they can sand and smooth off the top of the rail to bring the profile down, or they can sharpen and square off the bottom of the rail. That makes a massive difference to the feel of the board. But generally, it makes a difference to the feel of the board when it's moving faster through the water, which is why things like surfing or moving downwinding, maybe getting into catching little waves down a river, or even paddling quicker, trying to sprint, you will feel a difference in the rail shape. Then you might not really know what you're feeling, but there will be a difference in how the rail is reacting and how the water is releasing, especially off the back of the board. Definitely for most of you out there, you will feel the difference in rail shapes when you go surfing. Doesn't matter what size the waves are, as soon as you step onto a composite board, you will feel it's way easier to control in the wave, it's way easier to turn on the wave and actually initiate your rail to do bottom turns and top turns. An inflatable paddleboard, that big rail, especially this one being 5.5 inches thick, it's a lot more area to push into the wave and you're not going to get so much back. So that's definitely going to be one of the biggest areas where you feel a dramatic difference between an inflatable and a hardboard is the surf, no matter what size surf it is and no matter what level surfer you are. The next thing we're going to talk about is the bottom shape, or the rocker line. The rocker line is the curve of the board from the front all the way to the back. Now with inflatable paddleboards, generally you will have a small amount of nose rocker up at the front to stop the water from catching, and when you're paddling along it can just go underneath the board, and they're generally flat all the way to the tail. It makes it quicker to paddle, and it does actually make it a little bit easier to go in a straight line too. But a composite board, there's a lot more rocker shape into the board because they can get more of an accurate rocker line profile. So the rocker line at the nose may be very similar, but you will notice that the thickness up at the nose, going into the rail shape a bit more again, is way thinner. If you look at the profile of these two boards like this, you can see that the thickness on the blue board, the bamboo edition, is way thinner up at the nose than the 5.5 inch thick Fly Air edition. So with a composite board, you find that they will be able to change the rocker line slightly, but the inflatable paddleboards will have a more of a constant nose rocker shape. So it will look very different, and actually it will make the board react and feel different in choppy water or going surfing with it. A prime example where the two rock lines were very different on these two boards is me and Will were paddling from a flat water location where we were testing these boards downwind, and then going to have a few waves with them down the beach. So we had a little downwind session. It wasn't that windy and it definitely wasn't that big a swell, but it was really good fun. It's the sort of thing that you could get into on both these sort of boards. But you can see in the clips how the nose is catching and burying a lot more with the inflatable paddleboard than it is with the composite Fly. That thinner rail, having maybe a little bit more nose kick right at the tip of the nose, just keeps the water off the board, makes it a little bit quicker to paddle, and makes it a little bit easier to stay upright because the board is a little bit more stable. An example there of where rocker line, just to refine a little bit more on the composite, makes the board easier to paddle. And looking at the tail kick or the rocker at the back of the board, with a composite board, most boards, unless they're real designated flat water race boards, will have a small amount of tail kick. It really helps in open water paddling situations, again like the downwinding or catching surf, because you can move your body weight for the back and that brings that nose up and it stops you nose diving. One of the most common problems with surfing an inflatable paddleboard is as you catch the wave, the nose tends to sort of stay or seems to be very close to the wave, and you almost end up nose diving quite a lot, and you try and trim your weight back, but the nose doesn't really come up, and that's generally due to the lack of tail kick at the back of the board. The more tail kick you have, you can get back further on the board, and then the board rocks and brings the nose up. But if you're looking at paddling these boards both on flat water, back to back, tail kick doesn't really help. Actually having a flatter tail at the back of the board is going to make it, like I said, faster and a little bit easier to paddle in a straight line. And if you were paddling both these boards in mirror flat water, you probably wouldn't really feel a difference between these two boards. But if it got choppy, or if there was moving water or downwind paddling, you really would feel a difference in the rock line between an inflatable and a composite board. Now looking at the bottom shape of these boards, now this is a prime example of where an inflatable, they can't do anything with the sort of cross section bottom shape of the board. They can't put a concave in it, they can't put a V in it, they can't change that shape. It's basically flat all the way to the rails and then rounds up. Now even though this Fly in the bamboo edition is a very simple design, there's nothing massive going onto the bottom shape, but the small bottom shape that is put into the back of the board and around into the fins area is going to really help the smoothness of the board in the choppy water, into the surf, and generally when you're paddling more at speed. So having more of a bottom shape in any board, a composite board, is going to give you a more of a stable feel, and it really does add to the overall paddling experience, especially in the choppy water or where the board is moving quicker. So looking at the fin setups of these two boards, well, they're still 2+1 fin setups. What I mean by that is 2 smaller side fins and 1 bigger center fin. Both the boards come with US center boxes, which means you can move the fin forward and back, which is great for that more fine tuning and the trimming. The side fins on the composite board are obviously much more refined. They're going to give you much more better performance, again, when the board is moving quicker and especially in the surf. The more indestructible fins that are on the inflatable board are there to help the stability and help when you go in the surf, but they're not going to give you as much performance as the side fins on this bamboo edition. So there's a lot of stuff I've just said there and some stuff to think about. Maybe you followed it, or maybe you thought I was talking a different language, but really, what does it feel like on the water? What is the difference between standing on a fly air compared to a composite fly on flat water? Well, there is actually a big difference when you mean standing up. First off, you're going to notice that the bigger volume. The fly air is a bigger board. Okay, it's a little bit wider, but it's a lot thicker. That rail shape overall, the thickness of the board being 5.5 inches right to the nose and right to the tail, does give you more stability, but you are going to feel a little bit detached from the paddling. You're going to feel higher out of the water than the thinner based 4.5 inch thick board, but it really makes you feel much more planted on the board because you're lower in the water, you're closer to the water, and again, if you're closer to the water, generally the more stable you'll feel. So there is a big difference in volume between the two boards, and that's probably the biggest thing you'll notice just standing on in flat water. So if you're a bigger person and you're wanting a really stable, very voluminous board, then the inflatable is going to give you that extra volume, but at the same time the composite fly might not have as much volume, but actually for its size it still feel relatively stable because of the rails and the way you're feeling more planted in the water. When you're paddling in flat water conditions, these boards do feel very similar and you don't really feel a massive difference. If you're changing around your feet and you're moving your feet, or maybe you're doing step back turns and trying to turn your board faster, the fly air is more planted because it's thicker. Again, it's got more volume, more width and thickness at the back of that tail. When you go to do step back turns with a fly composite board, you find that you won't need to put your footwork so far back to get the board to pivot, because if you stand as far back as you would do on your inflatable board, you'll sink the tail straight down because it's a lot thinner in the thickness. So I would say the fly air is definitely an easier board to move around the board and get yourself into step back turns. The composite board is a little bit more reactive and you are going to have to be a little bit more confident with your footwork and when you're standing around the board. So now we're going to talk about transport, storage and durability, which is probably the biggest factor that you're all kind of thinking about when you're trying to decide whether to have an inflatable paddleboard or a composite board. Now the transport issue, it is easier to transport an inflatable paddleboard in a backpack for sure. Put it on your back, away you go. But at the same time, I've had hardboards for years and years and years, and I've got used to transporting them. I've got a roof rack on my car. It's very easy to put the board on the roof, tie it on with roof rack straps. And as soon as you get your head into thinking like that, it really doesn't become a massive issue. And especially when you see your friends pumping up their inflatable paddleboard and you're ready to go, it suddenly seems like a really big bonus having a hardboard. So the transport issues, that's really a personal thing. Storage again is another personal thing. Inflatable paddleboards, they can pretty much be stored anywhere as long as it's cool and dry. Hardboards, don't really store them outside in the rain. If they put them outside, they need to be have a cover over them, and definitely don't store them in a board bag wet. That's a really big thing. So you're going to know whether you're going to be able to store these boards or not, but again, it's something you get into, and if you've come from a surf background, storing surfboards really isn't an issue, so a hardboard for you might be absolutely fine. But if you're the sort of person that's been storing and transporting their inflatable board always inflated, well then I definitely think you could be looking at a hardboard. Now moving on to durability, definitely a question we get asked all the time, and SUPs are definitely the more durable option out of the two. But to be fair to composite boards, they're actually a lot tougher than many of you do think. The only time I don't like having a composite board is when I'm literally putting it down from the van to the car park. It's that one point there of putting it down. I'm looking for the grass, I'm looking for the sand, I'm looking for something soft. An inflatable paddleboard is just so easy. Take it down, you can even drop it on the floor, it doesn't matter. That's really where the big difference is. The scratches, the dings, the light scuffs are what will come onto a composite board, and definitely over 5 years your inflatable paddleboard will look very similar to the day you bought it, and your composite board will have some general light scuffs and scratches. For me personally, I would rather take those light scuffs and scratches for the performance gain you get with a composite paddleboard. But it is really nice to be able to pump up a paddleboard and not worry about where you put it or where you're going to store it, where it's going to get scratched. So it does take that headache away from that durability side of things. So loads of information there about two all-round paddleboards from Fanatic in completely different constructions. But what board would be best for you? How do you know what board to go for? Well, some of you, it might be very, very clear. Transport storage might be an issue. Then you have to look towards the inflatable route. But for many of you out there, there still is a question between should I go for the inflatable or the hardboard? My advice to you is ask yourself these questions. What sort of paddling are you going to be doing now? And what sort of paddler do you want to be? If you say that you want to paddle on flat water 90% of the time when the sun is out and the conditions are perfect, and you want to take the family paddleboarding and just have some general fun, then I would say an inflatable paddleboard is still the best option for you to look at. You're going to find it going to be able to transport them easy, you're not going to worry about storing them, and just for that family all-round fun, the performance gain you're going to get moving up to a composite board isn't really needed for you. But if you are the other side, if you're somebody who's getting into the sport, really loving it, and thinking, oh, I really love to give surfing a go, or go touring, or getting a bit more exploring, or I want to see if I could get into racing, and you're that sort of way inclined where you want to improve on the sport, and you want to grow into this sport, then a composite board will be better for you if you can store it and you can transport it, obviously. The performance gain in the surf is much, much greater than an inflatable paddleboard. Little downwinders is easier on this sort of board. Paddling into wind is easier on a composite board. So all of that sort of thing. If you're a paddler that wants to progress into the sport, go into a certain discipline, or just see where you end up in paddleboarding, then a composite board is going to be the better option for you if you can transport it and store it. So I hope you found that SUPboarder video interesting and informative, and it helps you understand if you want to go for an all-round iSUP or if you want to go for an all-round composite SUP. Two really nice all-round ranges from Fanatic, the Fly range. But don't just take my word from it. See if you can get yourself on an inflatable board and a hard board. See if your friend's got one. Get down the lake at the same time. Give them a back-to-back test, and I'm sure you'll find a difference between an inflatable and a hard board. If you want to find out where to buy these Fanatic boards, check out our trusted retailer page where we can get you in contact with some of your local retailers. And if you have already, thank you so much for sending us your suggestions about the best retailers around the world. It's great to hear who you've been buying kit from and what good experiences you've had so far. Thank you very much for watching this SUPboarder video. Check out SUPboarder Mag, SUPboarder Pro, and we'll see you next time on YouTube or SUPboarder.